Good morning. My name is Sean Pender, and I'm proud to be the National President of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. This morning, I welcome you to our live webinar entitled Labour Government and the Irish Legacy, Justice, Where Do Victims Stand? The British Labour Party and new Prime Minister Keir Starmer pledged to repeal and replace the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act, which was imposed by the Conservatives despite overwhelming opposition from Irish victims' relatives, human rights campaigners, the Irish government, and all major six-county political parties. Now, 3 months after taking office, there are growing real concerns that the new Labour government will keep the Independent Commission on Reconciliation and Information Retrieval, or ICRIR, created by the Tories to replace legacy mechanisms that were bringing justice to victims. The issue of legacy is at a critical venture. Throughout the conflict, hundreds of families, particularly in killings committed directly or in collusion with British Crown forces, were systematically denied truth and justice about the murder of their loved ones. The Good Friday Agreement promised victims' relatives a new beginning, and the Stormont House Agreement offered legacy mechanisms which appeared capable of delivering justice. Despite delaying tactics and denials, victims' relatives began to uncover truth through proceedings such as the Ballymurphy Massacre Inquest or the Ombudsman investigations into such acts as Loughlin Island, Operation Greenwich, or Operation Achille, or in civil actions. The Conservative Party responded by devising the Northern Ireland's Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act and creating the ICRIR Commission to replace the legitimate independent investigations mandated by Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And despite the oppositions of victims, relatives, the Irish government, and Irish political parties. Will Labour keep its pledge to repeal and replace, or will it retain the commission designed by the Tories to deny justice? Today, we will discuss this important matter, led by Martin Galvin, our Freedom from Ireland chair, and a very astute panel of guests that he will introduce. Martin, I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sean, and congratulations on your election. This is a critical issue. Families, as Sean has just said, who were denied justice during the Troubles, saw hundreds of killings where British troops of collusion was involved, could never get justice, were promised justice after the Good Friday Agreement, had been fighting for it, working for it. We had a Labour government which promised to repeal and replace the Legacy Act that was there, just as a final cover-up, a final denial of justice to these families. And now we're at a critical juncture. Today's panelists will discuss what is happening, what they see the new Labour government doing, whether this new opening for justice or whether they're trying to shut the door, and how important it is that Irish America, that politicians, that people in Ireland, that solicitors, that human rights groups, all of us get together and support the truth and justice of victims, get the Labour government to do what it promised to do when it was running for election. Our panel will begin with a victim, a family representative, as we always do. They're the most emotional. We'll begin in a second with Pola Cairns. 31 years ago, her two brothers, Jared and Rory, well known as GAA players in their area, were killed, targeted and killed by the Mid-Ulster UVF for that reason. We're then going to go to Padraig O'Muirigh. He was the solicitor who won the case or helped win the case for the Ballymurphy Massacre families, represents families across the board in legacy proceedings, is going to tell us what the status is, why those families now fear that the British are going to keep the very commission created to deny justice, and what is being done in Court of Appeals cases. We're going to go to Peadar Tobin, a member of the Dáil, an elected official, and he's also a member of the influential Joint Committee for the Implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, which an all-party committee, which has been leading the fight to pressure the Irish government to bring the case that it did bring against against Britain in the European Court on this issue, and is now monitoring what's happening in that case. We're going to finish up with Mark Thompson of Relatives to Justice, one of the leading civil rights groups on this issue. And at some point, we will hear from Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, who one of the 24 members of Congress who signed a letter to the British government initially congratulating them on their promise to repeal and replace, and are now concerned that that promise is one that the British government, like so many promises that the Irish have heard from the British, will never be kept. We're going to begin. We're going to go to Pola Cairns. Paula, 31 years ago, your family celebrated the 11th birthday of your younger sister. And after that celebration, something happened which changed your family's life dramatically. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, so at the time, I wasn't at the house that evening. I was at university in England, and the family had just celebrated Roisin's 11th birthday. They had a little birthday cake and birthday party, and they taken some family photographs. And then my parents went to leave to go to their weekly Irish language class in the local town 3 miles away. They'd left then instructions with the boys to make sure and lock the door, which they did. And just before they left, Liam, my brother, who was 14 at the time, he ended up going down to his friend's house, which was like about 50 yards just down the road. So in the house at the time then, Jared and Rory were sitting up in the living room watching TV, whilst Roisin was in the kitchen sitting. And then there was a knock at the door. And when she looked out, she could see two figures with masks on their faces. And being the date that it was coming up to Halloween, she assumed it was their friends playing a Halloween prank on them. So she opened the door and let them in. And they walked in through the kitchen, and one of them signalled to her to be quiet by placing his finger up to his mouth. And then they both walked up to the living room where Jared and Rory were, and shot them several times there. And then they exited the house and left Roisin standing in the kitchen. So Roisin ended up going up to the living room where Jared and Rory was, in a state of shock or whatever she was in at that time, and asking Jared why was Rory's eyes closed, and Jared wasn't answering her, so she didn't know what to do. So in a state of panic, she ran down the road in her bare feet to the local neighbour's house to she banged on the door, and they come out, and she was, I think, quite hysterical at this stage, and they couldn't really understand what she was trying to tell them. But anyway, they finally realised something had happened, and it transpired then that they basically had to raise the alarm.
All right. Now, Paul, your family always suspected that there was collusion involved, that members of the RUC, members of the Ulster Defence Regiment, a regiment attached to the British Army where loyalists were heavily involved, that they were involved in targeting and killing your brothers. Why is it your family always suspected that?
Well, for numerous reasons, they thought that they believed that the UDR and the RUC had prior knowledge on the night, because the place and the surrounding areas was basically swamped in police Land Rovers, the RUC Land Rovers and the UDR patrols. And we had numerous accounts of neighbours and passers-by telling us that they were stopped. So we believed that that was in place to allow the perpetrators, the gunmen, to come in safely, carry out the murders, and then return back to Portadown or wherever they come from. And that was our belief. That was one of the main reasons. We also believed that the investigation was poorly conducted, but it was deliberately poorly conducted, we believed. The exhibits from the investigation were mysteriously destroyed, and so were the logs of the investigation from the suspects. They were also mysteriously lost, and we felt that that was also part of the cover-up. We found out through the Ombudsman's report that the investigation, there was 20 officers investigating in the case in the first 2 weeks. After that, most of them were put onto other cases, including the senior investigative officer. Also, what came to light was that 12 weeks after the investigation started, it was effectively closed. There was nothing else done. There was no follow-ups. And we believe that was all basically deliberate.
All right. Now, you found you couldn't get justice from British Crown Forces. You couldn't get justice. You tried to work with the Ombudsman or historical inquiries team, various things. And then suddenly BBC began to investigate, and they were able to get information about exactly what had happened and who was involved. Could you tell us about that?
So yes, this series of documentaries took place, and it uncovered details of an aborted operation that we had never heard tell of. And this operation had taken place on the previous year. The person involved in this was a serial killer called Lawrence Maguire, who had committed.
When you say aborted operation, you mean there was an attempt to kill your brothers or family members before that? Yeah.
One year before it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had never been told of this until we actually watched this on the television. So he said, this particular man, Lawrence Maguire, had said that he had been coming to our house with another 3 men, 2 state agents with him, and their plan was to kill all the male members of the Cairns family. But due to the presence of a helicopter in the area, the operation was aborted.
Okay. Now, you then took this information that the BBC was able to find, and you continue to fight for justice. Now, right now, the commission that's created to deal with legacy cases is the one created by the Conservatives, the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery. What is your family's feeling about that commission? Do you think you could ever get justice from that?
Definitely not. The families in general all have a deep concern, and their concern stems from the mere fact that the Chief Investigating Commissioner has been a senior member of the RUC for years, and he's also been involved in Special Branch. So it has created a massive mistrust for people. They don't believe that they're going to get any justice, and they have no hope with it.
You're referring to Peter Sheridan, who was hired as the chief investigator for this new commission, and he was an assistant chief constable. He would have been involved or had responsibilities, certainly, that could have related to collusion and other issues which you're concerned were involved in the killing.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So would you ever, your family, and I know you're involved with a number of other victims' families, what's your group, and are any of them going to go to the ICRIR commission?
So I'm involved with Relatives for Justice and also with a group called Mid-Ulster Families. And as far as I'm aware, they wouldn't entertain the new group at all. They would have no faith, there's no transparency. So that creates too much mistrust for people.
Okay.
They don't even see how it can offer anything different than the Ombudsman or the HED. Less. That's what they think it's going to be, less.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We're next going to go to Padraig O'Muirigh. He's a solicitor. He was actually one of the solicitors on the Ballymurphy massacre inquest. That's an inquest that finally got justice for families after 50 years. And which meant a great deal to them. It was actually an example for other families throughout Ireland. But can you tell us first, what did it mean? It took 50 years, and the British say these are all old cases, and you can't get information. Did you have any trouble coming to a correct resolution in the Ballymurphy massacre cases? Were you able to get witnesses or information? And how much did it mean to those families who were involved in the Ballymurphy massacre when after 50 years, family members Father Mullen, others who had been accused of having guns, cassock, or taking action for the IRA, when they finally got justice and they were found to be completely innocent victims?
Well, I often describe our job similar to that of a forensic anthropologist. The truth is dug. You have to dig for the truth, and it's buried very, very deep. And that was no different for Ballymurphy. But you need tools if you're digging, and those tools, the inquest has many tools which assist families. And I'll give you a snapshot of some of those tools. The participation next to kin in legal proceedings. They have legal representation. They can engage their own pathologist, engineer, ballistics experts. The issue of disclosure, there's a vast part of disclosure that the coroner can provide any material that's potentially relevant, and that's very wide discretion. These hearings are also public. There's an accountability when hearings are public. The whole world can see it. The community can watch it. The press were present every day through the 100 days of evidence, so that was very important as well. Perhaps the most important tool was the ability to examine the evidence and also interrogate the witness statements, interrogate the witness. I know that it's often described as an inquisitorial process inquest, but it very often has an adversarial part to it. So we were able to call witnesses. There's a power to call witnesses, including military witnesses, and interrogate their statements and examine their evidence. And what an independent judge, which is the final piece of the jigsaw, can come to proper findings, which weren't available in 1972 in the original inquest. It was quite perfunctory. So we had 100 days of evidence in Ballymurphy. The original inquest in 1972 lasted no more than several hours for some of the families. So it was very, very different. And what we ended up with was the findings in May 2021. And we had a cavalcade of cars waving Ballymurphy massacre flags through the Ballymurphy estate, celebrating a judicial verdict in the north of Ireland 10, 15, maybe even 5 years ago. That wouldn't have been possible. And that community and the wider community in the north had a very, very negative interaction with the justice system, and the outcome in Ballymurphy was very, very different. So I think it was also very important for the families in that community, but also the wider issue of reconciliation in the north of Ireland when the justice system seemed to be working.
Well, not only that, but a number of the families were on the Late Late Show, which is one of the most popular programs on RTE. So it was a verdict that seemed to cheer up everybody across the country, throughout the 26 counties, as well as in areas like Ballymurphy. The fact that these families had finally gotten justice after so many years. Just to give one example of what you're talking about, for almost all of that period, it was said that Father Mullen, the Catholic priest who was killed, he was putting a rifle into his cassock, and that was why British troops shot him down and killed him. And you were able to refute that and exonerate. How was it that you were able to refute that after so many years? What was it that you were able to point to after so many years to get vindication for Father Mullen?
Well, that's right. There was a witness surgery in the Loyalist Unionist community before the inquest, and we actually had an attempt by Loyalist paramilitaries to intervene in the inquest and come forward as a properly interested party to those proceedings, which failed. But we had this surgery, and one witness had come forward, and he alleged in a statement that Father Mullen, he had observed Father Mullen step over a fence to go into this field where Bobby Clark, who was very seriously injured and survived, Frank Quinn had been shot and he was killed. Father Mullen was very seriously injured, and he was approaching Father Mullen was approaching Bobby Clark to give him his last rites. And he described when he reached Bobby Clark that he then lifted a rifle beside him and placed it under his clothing. And that was obviously to justify the lethal force used by soldiers. He said he observed and heard a soldier beside him say, "Shoot the priest, he has a gun." What we were able to do, and perhaps unknown to this witness, we had the autopsy photographs. We had the witness statements from various witnesses and civilian and military, and we were able to prove that the clothing that Father Mullen was wearing, it wasn't possible for him to conceal a rifle. He wasn't wearing the priest's vestments, he was wearing black trousers, and we have the evidence to prove that. And that's why inquests are very important. And when I refer to the examination of witness, this was a perfect example of how we were able to interrogate that statement, examine that witness, and refute the lies that he was saying. And obviously his his role was to besmirch the reputation of Father Mullen and justify that shooting. We were able to undermine that.
All right. So for almost 50 years, it was said that it was justified to shoot Father Mullen because he was putting the gun into his cassock as he went out into the field. And you were able to show photographs and other evidence that he wasn't even wearing a cassock.
That's correct.
Okay. And that's something that the British officials, all those proceedings, were not able to come up with by looking at the autopsy photo as you did as a family representative. All right. Now, why are you and other solicitors, other family members, victims concerned that what the British are about to do is just continue the ICRIR commission in which people like Paula and others have no faith in, feel it cannot deliver justice?
Well, I think it's very clear that the intention of this Labour government is to retain the ICRIR. I mean, we had a very public commitment before the election to repeal the Legacy Act. I think they've clearly walked back from that once they've got into power. Just a couple of days before the recent Court of Appeal decision, I'll come to the decision in a moment, the family of Fergal McCusker and Sean Brown received letters where the Secretary of State refused a public inquiry and said that their inquest, which was stalled, could then move into the ICRIR, which was fit to do it. And clearly that was a departure from their position previously that the act should be repealed. And we had interpreted that inquest should proceed. So clearly there was a change and we were very concerned about it. However, the Court of Appeal decision in recent weeks will have to give them some food for thought and they'll have to look at that issue again. It went further than the original Justice Colton judgment in 2 or 3 different respects.
That was the High Court decision. It then went to the Court of Appeal.
That's correct. So in terms of civil actions, the Court of Appeal determined that this was a breach, the guillotine on civil actions was a breach of human rights. In relation to inquest, it found that inquest could not be accommodated within the ICRIR, which is clearly the intention of this Labour government, for 2 reasons. One is participation, and I refer to the next of kin having legal representatives and deciding their own legal representatives. That wouldn't be possible within the ICRIR, and also the issue of disclosure, where the British Secretary of State would have the final say in disclosure in the ICRIR. That's quite different from an inquest, where the coroner effectively has a very wide discretion around disclosure. So that leaves a particular problem to the British government, that they're going to have to look at the inquest issue again. And it's very, very clear to me that that Court of Appeal judgment is clearly pointing the finger to the British government to say you must proceed with these inquests and make some statutory changes to allow that to happen. Whether or not they appeal this or do that is another thing, and that'll be clear in the coming weeks and months. The third issue, and I suppose it was a mixed bag judgment, the ICRIR is still determined to be independent, which is a problem because it's very much alive and well. There were no fatal blows to the ICRIR within this Court of Appeal judgment, and whether or not that's appealed to the Supreme Court or not, that decision will have to be made in the next, I think, the next week or two. But I think it's a very tight judgment, and it's going to be very difficult for either the British government or one of the family's representatives to challenge some aspects of it. So it remains to be seen whether this will proceed to the Supreme Court in the coming weeks.
Well, myself, Danny O'Connell, other AOH members had been involved in a meeting with Lord Kane, who was one of the sponsors of the act. And we asked him specifically about what would family representatives, people like you, what would your role be under the ICRIR? And he said, well, if a family member had a question, they could ask you, what question should I ask? Then they could leave you, go into the ICRIR issue and say, what about, was there collusion, something like that? Be told no discovery, nothing like the photographs which you saw, which enabled you to exonerate Father Mullen, nothing like any of the discovery that had been so effective in other proceedings. Is there anything else? How is the ICRIR going to do effective historical investigations? One of the things in the Storm and House Agreement was that they were entitled to a historical investigations unit. These hearings, it just seem to be very different. It's a review. Could you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, the HIU, the Historical Investigations Unit, as part of Stormont House, was a much more viable vehicle for families. It was independent, properly independent. It had investigatory powers. The role of the Secretary of State was very different than it would be under the ICRIR. To answer your question very quickly, the ICRIR is not able to conduct effective investigations, and certainly isn't able to replicate the type of investigation that you get from an inquest and other legal processes that families have been using over the last number of years, and very deliberately so. It's in the back of successes like Ballymurphy. In fact, on the day that we got the Ballymurphy findings, it was the first day that this Legacy Act was tabled in the British Parliament. I think that was very, very deliberate. They knew what was coming, and it was time to react to that. And the Legacy Act is clearly designed to take the judiciary and also legal representatives out of the equation.
Okay, so you're saying that that was actually, I think, a Queen's speech. The judgment was given in Ballymurphy exonerating the priest, the grandmother, the 10 people who were murdered that day by British troops, showed that the British were responsible. And on the same day, they were announcing legislation that was going to end processes like that so that other families like Pola Cairns could not get justice. Just one final thing. Paula referred to Peter Sheridan. He's the chief investigator. He was an assistant chief constable. One of the issues that many families are concerned about are collusion, whether British agents, whether the RUC, whether the UDR was involved in the killing of their loved ones. How is it that Peter Sheridan, who was an assistant chief constable, who would have had responsibilities to find collusion, how is it that he can be viewed as somebody independent, impartial, as an chief investigator for this agency?
It's crucial that anybody dealing with the past is independent, also has the perception of independence. Perception matters in the north of Ireland, as you well know. I think that the signs were ominous when this appointment was made, and families reacted in the way that Paula has been. What Paula had said there in terms of the family's views reflects my experience of talking to families as well. I think it was a disastrous appointment. It was a very bad start. I actually asked Declan Morgan about the appointment, and he had told me that there were very little people in for the job, and his room for manoeuvre on it was slim because of that. I don't accept that explanation. I think if this job was advertised, I'm sure there are many candidates out there with the requisite skills and, more importantly, the requisite independence to take this role on. And I'm not sure any great effort was made to do that.
Okay, we're next going to go to County Meath and to Peadar Tobin. Peadar, you're on mute. Just make sure you're unmuted. Peadar is a member of the Dáil, and he's the head of Aintu, a political party in the 26 counties. I'm sorry, it's an all-party, all 32 county party, but he's a representative, but he's elected to the 26 county Dáil, and he's also a member of a crucial committee, the Joint Committee for the Implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, and was involved. They had a delegation over in Washington at a time when myself and Sean and Danny O'Connell and other members of the ARH were there. We had conversations. As a result of that, your committee, including, I want to mention Fergus O'Dowd, went back and asked the Irish government to bring a case in the European Court for victims, and were an important factor in doing that. So, Peadar, what is your feeling now when you hear about all of this happening to victims, the moves that British seem to be making, that instead of repealing and replacing, they're going ahead with keeping the very commission created to deny justice? What's your feeling within the 26, within your position in that committee?
Yeah, so first of all, I do want to give credit to the AOH in terms of the work they've been doing this, and I think it's you can't give enough credit to the AOH in terms of this. I think they have been one of the most significant engines of pressure around this issue, both in the States and in Ireland as well. Obviously, we come from the position that the Legacy Bill gives amnesty to murder. It lets people get away with murder. We see it as the son and heir, if you like, of collusion and cover-up that happened in the north of Ireland during the Troubles. Back then, obviously, collusion and cover-up were denied by the British, but they can't deny this part of collusion and cover-up because this is all their fingerprints on it, because they created this particular bill. It obviously undermines, the rule of law and the rights to justice. And I do think that it puts Britain into the position of a rogue state, because they are heaping pain and injustice on people who have already been grievously wronged by the British state. So you're right. You mentioned that we went to into Washington, and we went as a committee to Westminster on this. And I will say, in terms of Westminster, it became very clear to us that the issue of the north of Ireland is not on the agenda. It's not a priority issue in Westminster at all. And even the British, the Labour Party peers and MPs and the Tory peers and MPs that we met, they're far more interested in domestic British politics. And that's governing, I think, the whole approach that they have to this. I think that one of the worries I had coming from this was when we were talking to the Labour Party. Yes, they were promising us that they would repeal this bill if and when they got into government, but they still weren't using the power that they had within the House of Lords to prevent the bill actually coming into place in the first place. So, all of us are probably used to politics, and, when people promise you something in the long term, but refuse to action in the immediate situation, obviously it's a situation where warning lights went off in my mind anyways. And I think that struck me in a big way. And I think what we're seeing here at the moment is the Labour Party are resiling from their commitments in relation to this for domestic reasons. And as a result, what we see is so many families, so many individuals in the north of Ireland who are, in serious need of truth and justice, still being refused it by the British government. I think the Irish government's position is interesting in recent times. This is my own opinion, and people might disagree with this, but up till about 3 or 4 years ago, the Irish government weren't really taking these issues seriously. I think the Irish government were of the view that the legacy issues in the north of Ireland were issues for the north of Ireland and not for the south. There's been a good deal of work done by a large number of groups, and the Committee on the Good Friday Agreement has, because of its cross-party nature, I think has educated a lot of the parties in the south around what's happening. The Irish government were taking a softly approach in dealing with Britain around these issues. It is part of Ireland's, foreign policy to engage for the long term and not to kind of be combative in how it engages. But it did take that case to the European Court of Human Rights, and that's a wonderful thing that it did do that. Unfortunately, we wanted it taken to the court before the bill became legislation, to try and prevent it ever happening. But anyways, they waited until it became legislation and took the case in January of this year. So
when Micheál Martin, who is the Tánaiste, he's also the Foreign Secretary, was in the United States just within the last 2 weeks, we were able, delegation, Sean Pender, myself, and Dan Dennehy, were able to table a question and to ask follow-up questions to make sure that the Irish government would continue that case in the European Parliament, in the European Court, until and unless they got something that was satisfactory to the victims. They were going to continue to go ahead. I know you've tabled a question in the Irish Parliament on that same issue to make sure that they know that it is important that they go ahead, that this issue is important. It can't have a compromise that falls short of giving the families justice. Could you tell us what you've done?
Yeah, so directly on the back of conversations with the AOH, I put in parliamentary questions to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I asked him 2 questions. I asked him, first of all, would he seek to take, let's say, interim measures, like an injunction against the British so they can proceed with any elements of this? Unfortunately, they batted that back and said they wouldn't. They said interim measures are taken in exceptional cases only, and usually in a case where there's actually a life in danger if a process is happening within in a country that comes under the purview of this court. So we asked another question, obviously, well, on what basis were the government taking this case in relation to the British? They pushed back on this, and they said they did not want to mitigate or legislate, I should say, in public on this issue. But they did give the overheads as to what were the steps they were taking in the case. So, for example, in their approach, the government have said that obviously the legacy bill is incompatible with Britain's obligations under the convention, including Article 2, the right to life, Article 3, the prohibition of torture and inhuman and degrading treatment, and Article 6, which is the right to access to a court, and Article 14, the prohibition of discrimination as well. They're focusing in on their interstate case, especially on the whole issue of immunity, especially in related to intentional killings carried out. And they say that this is contrary to Article 2, which is obviously the rights to life. And again, the cruel and humane degrading behavior. They're focusing in on the prohibition of the continuation of the current mechanisms for information recovery and truth and justice. Again, highlighting Article 2, Article 3, and Article 13 there. And the last point that they focused in is around the prohibition of new cases to be taken in the future. And again, they're focusing in on Article 6, which is the rights to access to a court as well. So all of those articles that I've just mentioned to you, these articles are articles that, anybody would expect would be normal in a liberal functioning democracy. The deletion of these rights are aspects that we would associate with a country that doesn't have democratic rights, that doesn't recognize the rights of citizens, authoritarian states, etc. So it is quite startling that these basic human rights are actually the framework in which the Southern government is actually taking the British government to court in this interstate case as well. So I also recognize, I think we've seen in the media that the Taoiseach in his visit with President Biden this weekend has raised the issue again, and I welcome that too. And to be honest, Ireland has had a friend in President Biden and his administration in these terms for sure. I do think that the Irish government needs to get a little bit more combative with the British government. It's quite clear to me that the Labour Party are resiling from their commitments in relation to this. I'd note that the police ombudsman indicated recently that there are 400 requests currently for investigations from families, victims and survivors. I think that's quite startling. 400 requests are in this particular backlog of people looking for justice. And we know that the police ombudsman's office has been curtailed significantly due to the lack of funding from the work that they have done. It is true that there has been truth and justice that has started to emerge just in the last number of years in a number of different directions. But there's no doubt in my mind that it's not just the legacy bill that is the block to that. While it is the major legal block at the moment, it is the provision of resources also to the Historical Investigation Unit, the Police Ombudsman, etc., that is important to find this justice. And the last one.
Sorry, I just wanted to thank you. We're going to move on to Mark Thompson. And I just want to mention again that your committee, it's an all-party committee. It's members of Fine Gael, members of Fianna Fáil, members of Sinn Féin, as well as Aontú, and how crucial that is in getting pressure on the Irish government. Yes.
Yeah, and one point, it's actually an All-Ireland committee, which is also quite startling too. So we have members of MPs from the North of Ireland who attend this committee and are members of this committee as well. So I would actually like to see this committee operate as a blueprint for the rest of the Dáil, so that we can actually allow for members, elected members from the North of Ireland, to participate in all aspects of the Dáil and the Seanad.
Okay, we're next going to go to Mark Thompson. Mark is the Director of Relatives for Justice. That is one of the key groups which has led the fight for victims. And I do want to mention in the registration, we had someone, Grania Tigert from Amnesty International. We had Declan Owens from the Rights and Securities International, another leading civil rights group in the north of Ireland. And we had John Tigert, who is actually the head of the leader of the Ballymurphy families, which won that great victory, which was cheered throughout all of Ireland. But we want to acknowledge them. Go to Mark. Mark, what do you see the British doing in terms of legacy justice, in terms of the ICRIR, and why is it that there's so much concern that they're just going to keep it and use it as a final cover-up to prevent people from getting justice?
Well, I kind of want to pick up on some points. Firstly, a point that Peadar touched on there. There were 450 plus complaints that were registered with the police ombudsman. That involved multiple murders, because some of those complaints were issues that people will be familiar with, attacks that claim multiple lives, like Loughlin Island and the Armour Road bookies, that had been resolved, but there were many, many more. So the 450 plus cases constituted in and around just 500 deaths. There was 1,100 civil cases lodged within the courts. And then the Attorney General had a backlog of applications. There were probably in around 60 or 70, and there's around 50 odd legacy inquests. So if you take that gambit of broad sense of issues that remain to be resolved, and then the PSNI itself and its legacy investigation branch had around 1,300 cases on its books that weren't solved. Now, if you take all of this, and it's all within the criminal justice process, and the Tories come in and they shut it down because these processes were delivering, Padraig's right, when they begin to work effectively and you have advocates in the courts like Padraig O'Muirigh and many other lawyers doing very diligent, very good work, working collaboratively with families and NGOs, and we're winning and getting success very slowly. What you do is you stop the resource, you stop the funding and the finance, the hamper and delay as a tactic. So if you take all of those issues and the Tories come in and Labour's in with them and we have the ICRIR. The ICRIR is up and running. It's up and running at more or less a year. It's open for application to people coming. It is dealing with 8 cases. That's how much confidence is in this body. It has hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. It has hundreds of staff. And it has, of course, plenty of people that served in the RUC and likely the British Army who were involved in organisations and have had oversight, possibly or potentially, of running agents. The same agents that were involved in getting into Pola's home and killing her 2 brothers. And we know 3 of those agents, Billy Wright, Robin Jackson and Alan Oliver. They're particularly responsible for in around maybe 100 murders in the period. And the people that were running them are some of the people and colleagues of the people that are now inside the ICRIR. That's why families won't go. It's not just an issue of a crisis of confidence. Families know they're being sold a pup. Families know that they're going to be written roughshod over and that they're going to be denied truth and justice. And this is going to take place in secret, not as Padraig so eloquently outlined, in open transparency where the community, society and the world can look on, where the media can follow it, where families can instruct their legal counsel, they interrogate witnesses, they interrogate disclosure of documents, to call in all the experts and to get to the truth and have a general court of public opinion as well as a legal process as well. All that's done away with. People know that. So Labour were on the right side of the line before the election, and now they're recoiling, as everyone is saying, and they're saying we can make this maybe work. Well, you can't. There's been 2 judgments that families have had in the courts and the Court of Appeal, and they've clearly outlined these processes aren't fit for purpose. The whole crux of this issue is a veto exercised by a Secretary of State, which can deny and decide we are not going to tell that truth. That's not in the public interest. In the legislation, I have a power to say you're not allowed to investigate this case, you're not allowed to report that, and you're not allowed to make that public. Now, if that happens in a court, you challenge all that and you can see that happening, which is why we have this particular piece of legislation that is a problem. The Irish government, and in fair play to the Good Friday Committee and the AOH, have played a fantastic role in this with Irish America and Congressman Fitzpatrick and others in keeping the pressure and keeping the spotlight on. So in the sense of the Irish government, and I think the committee heard evidence from Padraig as a practicing advocate and ourselves and some others, and we had said to them there's a ticking clock. You've a matter of days going into the Christmas break, and of course people like Peadar and others went off, and of course the Irish government had the case prepared and thankfully they lodged it. The Irish government are holding firm for the minute, and a number of NGOs, and you made reference to the Rights Security International, Amnesty International, the Pat Finucane Centre, the Committee on the Administration of Justice and ourselves held a meeting with senior officials from the Department of Foreign Affairs in Dublin, the Taoiseach's office and the Anglo-Irish Secretariat. And we said to them, there's no wriggle room here. This needs to be scrapped. Now, I've got information this week from some of the political parties that have been engaging the NIO and the British in this, and their position at the minute is that, well, we've spent a lot of money in creating this new body. We've employed a lot of people. It's there. That's really the story of it, and we're going to stick with that. And what they got from the reply from some of the senior people in the political parties that have been negotiating the Stormont House and have got got us to this place where all these issues need to be addressed, and where we got the Stormont House Agreement and where they were centrally involved. And it says, well, you spent all that money. What about the rights? Is that more important than the rights of thousands of people that buried their loved ones, that have been denied justice? So now Labour are saying, well, we spent all this money. We know it's not a good process privately, but publicly, we're just going to try and stick with it. That's not going to wash. 8 cases, and I believe that the majority of them come from one incident that's been referred from an outside police force in Britain to the ICIRR. They're really not. They're sitting in an office, in a building with £250 million. Think of what we could do with that if the police ombudsman had that budget, if the coronial service had that budget, if families had that budget with their advocates to go in civil cases. Think of the truth that you could get with that. But that's not what this is about. This is about burying the truth through legislation that provides essentially MI5 in the driving seat, directing the Secretary of State and the minions around it and covering it up. And families know that. And that's not going to wash. So the Irish government holding firm is good. NGOs holding firm, it's good. Families holding firm is important and very good. And with the support of Irish America, we will get to where we need to get to. The pressure needs to go on. It's not good enough that you have a position out of government and you come into government and you're playing this game. And repeal means repeal. And that's where we are, and that needs to be seen through and followed through. And the Irish government need to stand firm. Irish America standing and having their back is important. The lawyers fighting in the courts and us on the streets and battling this, we're not going away, and this issue will be resolved. And Britain and this agenda that it's driving, the Irish government's position is it needs fundamental root and branch change. It remains to be seen. I don't believe it. It needs scrapped, and we need to get back to Stormont House. Stormont House Plus is where we need to be. We can do this 2 ways: remedial orders in Parliament to suspend this legislation, put back in place the processes that did work until we get fresh legislation that puts a proper process in place that has the interests of human rights and victims and families and society overall. Because if the end goal is reconciliation, which they put in this bill as part of this process, it's never going to achieve it. If that's what they really want, deal with it and lance this boil, provide the resources and provide the process. One last point, and I know with time, Padraig O'Muirigh said about when you put the question to him about Peter Sheridan, what you did when you created this process is you ruled out everybody with the international credibility and standing that could come and play a role. People in the international human rights community with all of the experience wanted to play a role. They looked at that legislation and said they wouldn't touch it with a 50-foot barge pole. They wouldn't go anywhere near it. Their reputation and their integrity was more to them, and that this was a sham. And now you have it locked down with the people that played part of that sham running it. It's not acceptable, and it needs to go.
All right, we're next going to go, and we want to thank Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. He's a recent winner of the John F. Kennedy Award from the Ancient Order of Hibernians, but he's been a long-time voice and fighter for Irish justice every time we've come to him. Most recently, after Starmer was elected, he was one of 24 congressmen who signed a letter congratulating them for the promise to repeal and replace, but talking about how much they had to do to actually go through, follow through, and give justice to victims. And now we've been hearing for this 50 minutes how after making that promise, the election pledge, they're going back and doing exactly what the Conservatives have done. So, Congressman Fitzpatrick, we want to welcome you in. You had another major commitment. You're taking time out from that to be with us again and speak out for Irish justice. And what do you think of what you've heard about what Labour is doing with continuing this commission created by the Conservatives to deny justice?
Well, we're going to hold our feet to the fire. You know, the British, the United Kingdom needs the United States on a whole host of fronts. And we are going to call them out for this. That's the bottom line. You know, the bill, the quote unquote legacy bill became law despite unanimous opposition from the political parties in Northern Ireland. It denies justice to victims and families impacted by the Troubles. It also provides, as you all know, provides amnesty for crimes committed by armed forces members that served in Northern Ireland. In January of, I believe it was January of 2024, the Irish government sued the United Kingdom because the act was incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. It was about 6 months later that Labour pledged to repeal and replace the act if elected. They won in a landslide in July, and Keir Starmer, who's now the Prime Minister today, the Labour government has not fulfilled its promise to dismantle the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery, which was established by the act, and interested stakeholders, including my brothers and sisters in the AOH and LAOH. Obviously, we're very concerned that Labour now intends to retain and rebrand, to use their words, this commission rather than uphold its promise to repeal and replace. So, as you pointed out, we signed a bipartisan letter in July of 2024, reiterating our opposition to the Troubles Act, calling on Prime Minister Starmer to fulfill the promise to repeal and replace with the new Labour government. We have to prioritize reconciliation as it was established by the Good Friday Agreement. The entire island of Ireland, as you all know, they have to be allowed to choose their own destiny, particularly on the issue of legacy. So what is the strategy going forward? The British government needs the United States and depends on the United States for a whole host of areas. And we will be bringing them in to our office, once again, telling them that as Irish American legislators from both sides of the aisle, myself, Brendan Boyle, Bill Keating, a whole host of us, Dave Joyce, Mike Kelly, we're going to sit down with them and say, listen, this is going to be very damaging to our relations should you choose to go down this path. You made a commitment. Many would argue that you won in part because of that commitment that you made. So now you have to keep your promise. We are, of course, open to suggestions, but you know that we stand ready to do whatever is necessary. And the beauty of this is they're going to be hearing from both Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate on this, and that will clearly deliver a message to them.
Congressman, again, as you point out, there's so much division in American politics at this time, particularly in the lead up to Election Day. And the fact that you and other congressmen can say, when it comes to Ireland, when it comes to Irish justice, we act together, there's no division. And I just want to mention, I know Irish American congressmen like you and Congressman Keating and Boyle and Richie Neal and others are leading the way. But I have to say, there are people like my Congressman Richie Torres, who falls behind every initiative that you have, says he wants to sign on because he's been interested in the initiative, to what you do, and the AOH is working to get other congressmen across the country.
That's
so when
great.
you lead, they'll be behind you.
That's great. And I will tell you, I mean, these messages really do resonate. And I do believe that if we really amp up the pressure, that we can have a positive result here. I truly believe that, because the UK, they only have so much capital they can spend on issues. And the question for them is, are they willing to jeopardize our relationship with them over this? I would hope the answer is no to that.
Congressman, we really appreciate you coming on. I know you're very busy today. You had another major event and you came on, you were right on the money. I promised Matthew and Emery I would get you off within 10 minutes. And I don't want to say, you're just like Labour. You make promises, and the British government, you make promises and then you just don't keep it. So
yeah.
We appreciate
well, Martin, thank you, Martin. And to all of you, no, these are, trust me, not empty words. We are willing to back this up. We will make this a strong bipartisan push because this is not only the right thing to do, but it's my family obligation to all of you and to my own family to make sure that we get this done. Because as we all know, Ireland's done a tremendous job populating the United States with a lot of loyal followers and proud Irish Americans, but they need us to stand up for them. And that we will do. So there's a lot of bright minds here on this Zoom. Put them together, help us develop a strategy, and the answer will be yes from us, Democrat and Republican alike.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you very much for today and for everything you do.
You bet. Thanks.
Sean, do you want to go around, or do you want to
Sure. If you'd like to ask each member of the panel to give a comment, go ahead, and then I'll do some closing comments at the end of that.
Okay, we're just going to go around to everybody in order, just for a very short closing comment. Paula, begin with you.
Okay, well, I would just like to comment and say that I hope that the America can amp up the pressure, and we look forward to this repeal, and hopefully all goes well.
All right. And
Thank
please
you.
tell the Mid-Ulster Group and everybody that you work with, we're behind all of these cases. We're not going to forget. Padraig O'Muirigh.
Yes, just we have to keep our eye on the ball. Many of you will have heard the term perfidious Albion. The British government, not only in Ireland and in the US, but all over the world, have a reputation from resigning from their legal obligations. So it's important we keep the pressure on, and that they legislate. They're made to legislate for the gains made in the Court of Appeal decision. And civil actions are back on the table, and inquest as well. It isn't enough that the Court of Appeal point the finger to change. There must be legislative change for the British government to enact that. So that's where the pressure needs to be. And organisations like yourselves will obviously play a key role on your side of the water in doing that. So very grateful for the invite, and keep up the good work.
And again, we want to congratulate you, that Ballymurphy inquest verdict, which you were so important in winning. That is something that cheered people in the United States, cheered people across Ireland. And I know John Taggart and others that cheered those families who have gone through so much for 50 years and really feel it's worthwhile. Next, we're going to go to Peadar Tobin.
Yeah, thank you very much. I suppose, first of all, I believe that we've given the Labour Party enough time to get their act together in relation to this. They've failed. One of the biggest planks of the Labour Party in Britain's political agenda has been to rebuild relationships with the EU. And they have really made an effort to try and fix their relationships with the EU after the damage done by the Tories. But I think that's actually the legacy bill needs to be put front and centre of these issues. It can't be a peripheral issue just between Labour and Ireland. I think the Irish government and the Irish political establishment now need to make sure that the legacy bill becomes a key part of the relationship between the EU and the British. So in other words, that the relationship can't be healed unless the British government focus on this shocking, devastating lack of justice in this particular bill.
Okay. Mark Thompson.
Yeah, I think it's make your mind up time for the British government. I think that Hilary Benn and Keir Starmer need to feel the pressure from the Irish American lobby. I think that that pressure is something that they'll listen to a bit more cautiously and go forward at making probably the right decisions if the pressure's applied. We'll keep doing what we're doing here. I think keeping the Irish government, keeping the interstate case on the books for Strasbourg, keeping the cohesion between all of the various people here and the families, just keeping the pressure on. But it's make your mind up time for Hilary Benn and Keir Starmer. Either they believe in the Good Friday Agreement, they believe in the rule of law, they believe in rights, and they believe in delivery. And really that's what it comes down to.
Again, we want to acknowledge Grania Taggart from Amnesty International. We want to acknowledge Declan Owens of Rights and Securities International, I believe it is. Apologize to him. John Taggart. What this shows, the fact that we can unite Congress, we can unite representatives from the Dáil, we can unite Irish American organizations like the Unity Conference and others who are participating in this, the Ladies AOH. And you get them, and solicitors like Patty, get them all behind victims. That's our way forward. I know Sean Pender, one of the things that happened when he was elected was a key resolution to support legacy justice for the AOH. It was passed unanimously. And this program shows that we intend to keep that, as we did when we met with Micheál Martin, as we did when we met with just a couple of weeks ago, as we do at all times. We're behind you, Paula. You can convey that message, and we'll stay behind you until you get the justice you're entitled to. Sean.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you all who've joined today's very important webinar. This is just the latest in a series of a lot of webinars we've had on this issue and other important issues. And I'd ask all our members who are watching and others to visit our YouTube site to share these videos with their members and other who want to learn more about it. I want to thank Martin Galvin for the great work he's doing. Martin is always out front on this, but he's very humble. Next week, Martin will be receiving the highest honor that the New York State AOH can give as the Byrne Hayes event at their Utica dinner, where they'll also be honoring the current New York President, Tom O'Donnell. So Martin, that congratulations on that. Well deserved. To our members of the panel, Paula, first and foremost, please take our condolences. We realize at this time, as the calendar comes up, that amazingly, October 28th will represent 31 years since the great loss that you and your family have had to endure and have to still endure, not getting the truth. So please let us know, let all know that you are in our prayers, and we will not forget you. It's simply some of the reason why we fight as hard as we do. We remember those that are lost throughout the North. Once I jump off of this call, I'll be joining the New Jersey AOH for their state call. And in New Jersey, we actually remember Father Mullen with an award on a bi-yearly basis to recognize our clergy. So we try to remember those that are lost. So Paula, again, our condolence, and we commend your fight, your spirits, and we're there with you. To Padraig O'Muirigh, continue, thank you, and all the brave men and women who in your offices and other offices who use the legal system the way it's supposed to be to get justice. You stand in the shadow, of course, of the late great Patrick Finucane, and continue to do the great work that he does. And we celebrate that the Finucanes hopefully will get some justice as we move forward. Peadar Tobin, thank you for being a great friend of the AOH. Some of the things you said, I think, were very powerful. The AOH is an engine of pressure, and we will continue to do that. And I agree with you. I believe the United Kingdom, in many ways, is becoming a rogue state when it comes to dealing with the past, and that we need to be more combative. There's a way to be combative and still be respectful. We are still going to advocate that the Irish government continue to take that case and do not repeal that case for any reason. Quite frankly, I think it's the one last thing that can force us to go through with this process. To Mark Thompson, I think, Mark, some of the things you talked there today are very, very telling. The process is not delivering. They've built this tremendous process, and for you to, like you said, 250 million euros. What could be done with that from a process to get justice? See, they saw that justice was starting to work because of the work of Padraig O'Muirigh and others, but they said, no, we'll put something that's even better in. Now, the fact that only 8 cases have been taken up on that, I think should tell anybody on this call and anybody listening that there's just no faith in this system whatsoever. There's no transparency whatsoever on it, and that's why we need to get to repeal this act. The British seem to take a philosophy of if we build this, they will come. Well, I think they should also notice that they built this and no one's coming. It's not working. We need to get to legacy. And I hope that everybody on the call realizes the powerful remarks of Congressman Fitzpatrick, because you see the British continue to come over to our country to try to sell this bill of goods as the next great thing. So our job has been taking your stories and telling it to power, speaking truth to power in this country, so that when they come in, we can combat that and we can say, no, that's not a good. You can do whatever you want and say how great it is. The bottom line is it is not going to deliver. So we thank all for being on this call today. Again, it is something that we will continue, and we see as part of the Good Friday Agreement, and the AOH, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and others stand for the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement. So with that, I want to thank you for your call. We stand with you, and we will continue to fight for justice on behalf of all the people of Ireland. Thank you very much for attending today's very important webinar.